What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Today, Friday, special Friday edition, Friday, July 26th, 2019. You are tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker.com, as well as Facebook, as well as Twitter. Any and all the major platforms, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast is available, ready and waiting for you, the listener, to download and, of course, subscribe. Please feel free to do so. Please feel free to let me know when you do. That way, when we communicate, I know who you are, right? That's the easiest way to get things done. Guys and girls, I went to Toronto over the last few days. I was there Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday took in the Toronto Blue Jays game. Thursday made my travels back to Western New York and saw a lot of Buffalo Bills training camp buzz, and that was pretty fun. It's good to be back in that swing of things. And, of course, as you guys know, I will obviously have a lot of Buffalo Bills coverage on this podcast, but in particular, this is a podcast that is dedicated to the UFC main event tomorrow night. Usually I don't do a preview and prediction episode of the show involving that fight card's main event until about a week prior, not a day prior. But I'm going a day prior for this one. UFC featherweight champion Max Halloway puts his belt on the line against Frankie Edgar this weekend. Tomorrow night, a rising superstar, current MMA superstar at UFC 240 takes on a UFC MMA legend in Frankie Edgar. And this has been a fight that has been teased and thrown our way several times. You know, that this fight has been, quote-unquote, in the works, but a fight that is finally happening. The tale of the tape, Max Halloway, 27 years old. He's my age, born in 1992. Height 5'9", weight 145. Obviously, both fighters did make weight. The reach, 69 inches for Max Halloway. And for Frankie Edgar, he is 37 years old, 5'5", 145 with a 68-inch reach. So he's got some long arms for the fact that he is 4 inches shorter than Max Halloway. There's no doubt about it. When you see these two guys stand face-to-face across from one another at a press conference, both Halloway and Edgar face-to-face, Frankie Edgar looks much, much smaller than him. And I don't think Frankie Edgar would have it any other way. I don't think Frankie Edgar would choose any other circumstances than the ones that he's working with for this fight, because there is no pressure on Frankie Edgar. Frankly, and I hate to say this, but not many people believe that Frankie Edgar will even win this fight in general, so there's even less pressure on Frankie Edgar and even more pressure on Max Halloway. A real interesting dynamic of this fight is the circumstance that Halloway has lost his last fight, and that Edgar, Frankie the Answer Edgar, has been able to bounce back and get a win in the win column, albeit last year over Cub Swanson, who has been on a little bit of a downslide. But it's safe to say the last two fights, both of these guys are 1-1, but they share common thread. Frankie Edgar in his last three fights, his last loss, I should say, was the last guy that Halloway beats. Frank Edgar's last loss was to Brian Ortega, and it was a knockout loss, the first knockout loss of Frankie Edgar's career. Ortega then gets the title shot against Max Halloway, takes a true pounding, takes a true beating, and Halloway remained victorious and retained his title. That was very eye-opening to me because it made me think to myself, if Max Halloway and Frankie Edgar ever do get in the octagon against one another, they have a common opponent in Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega knocked out Frankie Edgar, and Max Halloway beat the brakes off of Brian Ortega. So that's an interesting dynamic to this fight. There's also the dynamic of how these guys fight, obviously, that you're going to look at each and every fight and look at how these guys fight. What are their styles? Is one guy faster than the other? Is one guy stronger than the other? What are the dynamics within the fight that we need to talk about, that I need to talk about to you on today's show? To put it really simple and just simplify this for the MMA fans, Max Halloway is a volume striker. He likes to throw things 3 at a time, 4 at a time. He likes to move forward. He likes to stand and trade. And he likes to put people in this quote-unquote web of just confusion and back and forth, battle for battle, blow for blow style of fight. That's what he did to Brian Ortega, and Brian Ortega could not swim with the shark. That's what he tried to do to Dustin Poirier in his UFC interim lightweight title fight, and he also could not, and Max couldn't swim with the shark that time. I think there were some other reasons for that. We'll get to a little bit later maybe, but neither here nor there. Max Halloway is a tough SOB. There's no two ways about that. Very tough guy, very willing and able to make it a rough, tough fight. But the guy opposite of him, Frankie Edgar. Now, when I list off the last two, statements of the tale of the tape, or the first two, Frankie Edgar being 37 years old, Frankie Edgar being 4 inches taller, or 4 inches shorter, I'm sorry. I think that Frankie Edgar is as tough as they come. But, and it pains me to say this, I don't know if that is good enough. I don't know if this is a good enough trait, good enough attribute. For Frankie Edgar to win this fight, he is going to have to go through hell. There's no two ways about that. Frankie Edgar is going to have to show his patented toughness that he showed in the Gray Maynard fights, that he showed in the BJ Penn fights, that he's shown throughout the course of his career. He's going to have to show that again. But I don't know if you can show toughness to a guy that is much younger than you, much bigger than you, and much stronger than you, and that guy's the champ. He's got something that he needs to defend. You're the challenger. It automatically somewhat puts you at a disadvantage in that respect, being that Max Halloway is a champion that lost his last fight. I believe Max Halloway will be more motivated than ever to win this fight and defend his title. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this fight's competitive, but I don't see it being that competitive unless Edgar takes Halloway down to the mat at will. I don't see it being that competitive of a fight, and I hope I'm wrong on that. And I mean, no disrespect to Frankie Edgar in saying that. And a part of me feels like he's somewhat being fed to slaughter here. And I could be wrong. We could wake up, Sunday morning, we could wake up and see that Frankie Edgar won against Max Halloway, and that's one of the greatest upsets in UFC history. I think it would be. Now, to say it's an upset would mean that most people think Max Halloway will win. Check. Most people do think Max Halloway will win. To say that it is a fight that is highly lauded as being one that should be close, that's not on the money either. So I think this is going to be a big fight for Frankie. This is really it for Frankie, and that's the one dynamic of this fight that I think will motivate him the most, is knowing that this is my last title shot. This is it. No more. I'm not going to get another one. And knowing that might be just what the doctor ordered for Frankie Edgar, and knowing that might be what will hurt a guy like Max Halloway. Because whenever someone has something more to fight for, or just as much to fight for as he does, that's where things can kind of get a little bit dicey for Max. We saw that with Dustin Poirier. We saw that with Conor McGregor back in the day. Frankie has to slow this fight down. In order for him to win, he's got to slow it down. He's got to avoid those exchanges because Max Halloway has far too much reach, far too much length, far too much body mass for Frankie to just stay on the outside and pick his shots like Frankie has been known to do against guys like BJ Penn. That might have worked against BJ Penn, but BJ Penn was virtually the same size as Frankie Edgar. Now Frankie fighting a bigger, stronger, faster opponent. He's got to try to take him down. Max Holloway's got those long legs. You take him down, wear him down, win the fight. That's the special ingredient to do that. But ultimately, I do think Max Holloway will win this fight. What happens next for Max Holloway from there remains to be seen. But either way, it will be a great fight, and it'll be one that I believe will be competitive. I just hope that we don't see Frankie Edgar go out there and get knocked out cold. I think that would be very tough to watch for a lot of fight fans because Frankie's such a revered legend, such a respected fighter. But it could happen due to the fact that Max Holloway is bigger, faster, and stronger than Frankie Edgar. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take. Thank you for tuning in. Join the takeover, everybody. Follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. And feel free as well to follow me on Instagram at Ryan Thomas Take. Constantly uploading tidbits of the podcast here and there, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe on Spotify. And you will enjoy the show. I guarantee it.